everybody needs an advocate.
Because I'm not there 24/7.
Families that have hemophilia mature faster.
I've been feeling a lot of anxiety lately.
I'm so tired of being strong.
To understand how far we've come helps you appreciate where we are now.
No is just no for this person. Somebody's gonna say yes sooner or later.
And it helps you understand that there are more steps to be taken in the future.
You're the first person I've met with a bleeding disorder.
Let's fight the disease and not the people who have it.
This episode of the Powering Through podcast is brought to you by NCHS, National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, a subsidiary of NCHS Holdings. NCHS is a full-service healthcare organization which, through its affiliates, includes an accredited specialty pharmacy founded to serve people with hemophilia and other blood disorders and to optimize patient quality of life by providing personalized healthcare services in addition to pharmacy services. NCHS makes independence the goal for people living with chronic disorders. They believe the home or an alternate non-clinical setting is the best place to receive treatments, which is why they do much more than just fill prescriptions. Patients of NCHS can also expect medication therapy management, coordination of nursing services, and much more, including translation services for non-English speakers. Learn more about NCHS services and the team who provides them by visiting nchswecare.com. Once again, that's nchswecare.com.
Hello and welcome to the Powering Through podcast, featuring panel conversations on obstacles, challenges, and what it takes to overcome, held for the benefit of the bleeding disorders community. The Powering Through podcast is sponsored by NCHS, produced by BloodStream Media, and I am your host, Heather Robb. You can subscribe to the Powering Through podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to have the most recent episode delivered directly to you. And visit poweringthrough.org to see videos, photos, and other podcast episodes from all of our Powering Through events. In this episode, we give a listen to our Powering Through event held during the Florida Hemophilia Association's annual Family Education Symposium in West Palm Beach. Our participants were community members Lilliam Bervis, Allie Cashel, and Bobby Monahan, and the host of the Powering Through panel is Patrick James Lynch. We start our conversation with Lilliam, who talks about living with VWD and how attending camp as a young girl taught her to stand up for what she needs. That skill has been particularly valuable for navigating the new insurance landscape and understanding what her options are. So, let's take a listen to our Florida Hemophilia Association's Powering Through, starting with Lilliam Bervis.
Can you speak a little bit about when you first got involved, your experience being a woman with a bleeding disorder here in Florida?
When I was approximately 11 or 12 years old, the foundation down here, they had a C camp, but there was one line in the application that said that you had to be a boy. So I actually remember calling the phone number on the form and saying, hey, I have a bleeding disorder, but I'm a girl, and I wanted to know if it was still possible for me to come. And I was actually able to go, so that was like the first time that I remember pushing for anything and then realizing like, well, maybe this is the way I have to go. Like, otherwise I'm never going to get to go to any of these events. And I still have a bleeding disorder, so I should be able to go. I wanted to meet other women and to be able to tell my story and talk to other people and see what other people were dealing with. The perception was different even from the medical community, where it was only boys who had bleeding disorders. So yeah. I've been able to see that change.
By you saying, hey, I want to go to C camp, I have a bleeding disorder, I'm just like these boys, you're helping yourself go to C camp, but you're also just helping women with bleeding disorders, right? Like sometimes advocating for the self is really advocating for a much larger population than you might realize, because once a voice is heard, that individual is empowered to do more for the community. So it's neat to hear that in your story.
Next up, we hear from Allie Cashel, who's been living with Lyme disease since a young age. She talks about how important it was for her to connect with an online community and how writing her college thesis inspired her to open up about her disease. Let's jump back in and hear from Allie.
Being a woman who's an advocate and an outspoken person, do you find any sort of obstacles or barriers that you think gender kind of plays a role in?
The perception of women a lot of the times in these spaces can be sort of overdramatic or hysterical, something along those lines, and sort of having people like you be able to speak out and be able to be a part of these communities in a totally rational, sort of equal player kind of way helps to sort of take that stigma away, I think, from the experience of women living with these illnesses and living with these diseases. So yes, absolutely.
Lastly, we hear from Bobby Monahan, who started connecting with the global hemo community by using the hashtag Hemophilia on Instagram. He talks about how his independent spirit has helped him thrive, from self-infusing to figuring out insurance. We'll jump back in to hear from Bobby right after this quick word from our sponsor.
You've heard from NCHS about the services they provide to their patients. Now they'd like you to meet one of those patients. Joe. When Joe first moved to St. Louis, it was a bit of a shock. It's a big city, he was looking for a job. He didn't have much time to try to figure out his new insurance policy or figure out how he'd continue to receive his factor. Joe made a call to an NCHS rep he met at a conference, Kara, and Kara helped Joe get his coverage and his care in order. She ordered Joe's factor and made sure it got to him on the same day every month. She'd call to make sure everything arrived in order and check in on him periodically to make sure that he was keeping up with his care. Kara works for NCHS, the specialty pharmacy and healthcare organization, and this is what she does. She takes some of the hassle out of everyday life with a bleeding disorder. So Joe was able to focus on self-care without having to spend hours on the phone with doctors, pharmacies, or insurers. His factor and supplies showed up on time every month in the right quantities, and if there was ever a problem, he could call Kara. She just made life easier. NCHS. We care for life.
Yeah, I started using Instagram probably about 3 years ago. I started using hashtag Hemophilia, and I met 2 other people that way. And then we connected on Facebook, and then it happened that year that NHF was in Orlando, and I didn't know. And I saw one of them had posted a picture at Universal, which I live right across the street from Universal. So I sent him a message saying, like, hey, if you're here, like, let's meet up for dinner. And they're like, oh, well, we're all here for this big conference.
Yeah.
And they're like, where are you? And I was like, I didn't even know there was a conference. So.
Yeah. So, Allie, I've been really interested to learn about Lyme disease.
For about 10 to 20% of people who are infected, and we're dealing with about 300,000 new cases every year, so that's a decent number of people. For about 10 to 20% of the people who are infected, they don't get better. They stay sick, and many times their symptoms get worse and worse. And the conception in sort of the mainstream world of this disease is that it is impossible for you to stay sick, that once you've had that 4 weeks of antibiotic treatment, you're cured, no questions asked. And so patients who are diagnosed with this or who are living with this sort of have to navigate this world of saying, most doctors think that I'm sort of psychologically disturbed here.
It's funny, I can't help but think, again, speaking about women with bleeding disorders, being told by doctors, well, you're a woman, you can't have hemophilia, especially, right? Like, can't have. And doctors have said this to people. So to hear, like, well, it's just in your head, I think that's something we can certainly relate to. But so those numbers are really interesting. 300,000 new cases a year, and you're saying 10 to 20% of them, those people have symptoms beyond their antibiotic treatment.
Yes, exactly.
So we're talking about tens of thousands of people who are experiencing symptoms, and yet, as you were describing to me, it's controversial to take the standpoint of, no, these people still have Lyme disease. The medical community would generally say, no, they have something else.
Oh yeah, it's quite controversial. The Infectious Disease Association from America and the Center for Disease Control take a very hard stance against that perspective. I am a big advocate for that sort of chronic tick-borne illness community at this point.
But why is that so controversial when there's such a large sample size of people who are experiencing symptoms directly connected to a tick-borne infection? Why is it controversial to connect the dots and say, hey, I don't think the antibiotic treatment is necessarily working at an effective enough rate for all people who are infected?
Other than Lyme, the blood tests for the other tick-borne illnesses, those diseases are often not tested for. So patients who are suffering from those diseases, their doctors don't necessarily know that they are. But the conversation hasn't started around it yet, and so there isn't really a push yet for learning more about it and for addressing it sort of at the level of the gravity of the situation, I would say.
Yeah, you had said when your parents first found out about your diagnosis, the community was really where they went to try to just get information. Is that correct?
I mean, if you guys look around, like, these are people that there's fountain of knowledge in here, and just being able to talk to people and share your story, share what you're going through. Like, you don't know what anybody else has already gone through, and they could help you or tell you, like, hey, actually so-and-so was going through that last year. Like, maybe you should talk to them, see what's out there.
Yeah, if I could add to that resonates so much, because I really wasn't at all involved in the tick-borne illness community until just a couple years ago when I started working on the book. I was first diagnosed when I was 7, so I went through my adolescence living with this and didn't know anybody else really who was going through it. I didn't have that sort of community resource. And then as I found it in the last couple of years, the amount that I've learned and the amount that just normal people, not doctors, like people sitting in this room, have the resource that they've been for me, and sort of my healing experience has been unparalleled. I've been so lucky to have that, and sort of having those people share their stories with me has been such an inspiration. And so that resonates so much with me, what you said.
And the way into community, there's new ways that weren't available when any of us were kids, primarily through the internet and through online interaction and social media.
Meeting other people who are going through the same thing, whether it's, on the other side of the country or a different country. I've met a couple people online who, like in Egypt and stuff, who don't have as great as access to healthcare. I mean, it really puts stuff into perspective. So, like for my brother too, like he was in a big denial about everything, as I'm sure, like he was a teenager. I'm sure I've heard about a couple people here who have teenagers who don't want to follow their treatment plan. And like he was going through the same thing, kind of in denial. He's a big skateboarder. And when I started meeting people, I kind of got him into the social media stuff, and he finally had agreed to come out to NHF last year and met a bunch of people, and now he's involved too.
I had a brother who also had hemophilia and passed from a cerebral hematoma, partially as a result of his noncompliance with his individualized care plan. I think as a parent, something that I hear a lot is you can only say the same thing so many ways, and at the end of the day, they'll do it or they won't. But you look at interacting with someone online first, right, in a safe way as friends, relating to things on skateboarding, or that was the reason for Stop the Bleeding, was let's create a funny YouTube series that's about hemophilia, so that if you have a bleeding disorder, there's something you can interact with and enjoy, but we're building a positive emotional association between the diagnosis and the individual. It does help us create a funnel for engagement. And we were talking about this last night or this morning, how there's people who are not physically, they might not be able to leave their home. I mean, I just had a friend he's got a really nasty inhibitor. He was in the hospital for, I think it's going on 2 weeks, and he's posting pictures every day from the hospital, and some of them are a little bit sad, but he just wants to reach out, and he wants us to interact with him and let him know that we see him and we feel his pain. He's got a community behind him so that he's not losing his life in those 2 weeks that he's confined to a hospital bed.
Especially for young people, there are things that you want to talk about with your 15-year-old friends that you can't talk about at a support group where there are a bunch of moms there, things like that. If you want to talk about boys or whatever that is, that's not part of the conversation. But I think that social media has really provided an outlet for that, and it's a platform. It's a platform for you to speak up and for you to become your own advocate, and it's a space where people will listen and where people will respond. Like, it's not only like you're saying something out to the world and no one hears you and no one cares. People care.
Lily, you were a part of NHF's MYLI, the National Youth Leadership Institute.
I remember my first trip was to NHF in San Diego. It was the first time where I was meeting another young woman who had gone through a lot of the same things I had gone through, to the point where we actually dubbed each other our hemo twins. Kind of interesting to hear my story or a really similar story coming out of somebody else. That weekend when we left, it was kind of bittersweet, but we were all leaving with some kind of a mission. You learned something or you took away something that you wanted to share with people. And after that, just a friendship really developed where it wasn't so much like my parents were reaching out, but I was also reaching out. And I had friends and I had people the same thing probably you experienced, where it was, people my age, and we could talk without having adults looking in, or having a group with all moms and one of the moms being your mom. So it was very different. I came back and I continued to be involved here, but it was also I could call my friend and be like, hey, now I'm doing this, have you ever experienced this? So it was learning to do that for myself. And then also just having somebody to talk to if need be, and just having those candid talks where, like you said, it's not something you necessarily want to share with, because our nurses or doctors are really great, but they're not somebody you call on the weekend, or you don't have their cell phone number.
Right.
So.
Community building is something that's extremely important to me for that reason, because we have leadership and we have parents and role models, but sometimes you just want to be a person in the company of peers who understand you. And that only happens if you facilitate environments where that can be cultivated, if you have programs that allow for those people to come together and meet their hemo friend.
I had always been pretty independent with my bleeding disorder. I learned how to self-infuse at 8 years old. So from that point on, I had been pretty much infusing by myself that entire time, kind of like a latchkey kid, you know? So
Yeah.
I've always been pretty independent. While I was in school, I didn't have a job or anything, so I was able to get Medicaid. My medication didn't cost anything to me at that time. So once I graduated and started making money, they took it away. I was kind of just forced into learning a little bit, and nobody had ever said, you're going to have to worry about insurances when you get out here, because, I wasn't involved in the community, so at that point, so I had no idea. It was pretty scary because I wasn't very compliant. So when I moved away, I realized, I'm all kind of on my own now, and I started doing prophylaxis, so I didn't have very many bleeds at all. And once the factor was gone, I kind of had to ration it out, and I couldn't do as much. And
I don't feel like I'm expert on a whole number of things related to bleeding disorders, but I know where the experts are, or I know who I can ask to find one.
But when I talk to people in other countries, the UK, Australia, rates of infection are almost as high as they are here, but the support is minimal. I'm hosting a conference in London and in October, and I was reaching out to find a doctor to speak, thinking that, of course, that would be easy, right? There are plenty of cases, doctors will speak. There is only one clinic in the entire United Kingdom that is treating Lyme disease, and they're having 7,000, 8,000 new cases a year, and there's only one clinic that's treating it. And think about the number of people then who are going without treatment and who are in that same sort of space. They're just getting sicker and sicker, and the resources aren't there. When we think about our own situation, we have those moments of such vulnerability and sort of like fear, but in comparison to some other spaces, it makes me feel very lucky to be here and have the resources that we have here.
Because of what this community experienced in the 80s and 90s with the blood contamination crisis, there is a strength and there is an advocacy community thing built into us. I think we're a very empowered community, and I think most people would agree with that. For people like Lily, Bobby, and I to get involved in this community, there's a structure to support it. What was the inspiration to take on that task?
As I was a teenager and went through sort of my diagnosis and my treatment experience, I really didn't talk about it with anyone because I was terrified, truly, truly terrified that people wouldn't believe me. I was told by some of the best doctors in the world, like, you're crazy, this is psychosomatic, go home and get a therapist. And yet antibiotics and other treatments were helping me get better.
And you heard that multiple times?
Multiple times, yeah. I had a really, really bad flare-up my senior year of high school, where it was the first time I ever experienced neurological symptoms. I was in 6 car accidents in 6 weeks. After that, I sort of came through that and I was like, I cannot deal with this anymore. I can't deal with talking about it. I can't deal with people telling me that it's not real. So I just shut it out. I went through college, pretended like it didn't happen. Thankfully, I was pretty healthy those 3 years. Didn't tell my friends, didn't tell anyone. Then my senior year, I was a writing major. I had to write a thesis, but I wasn't really ready to write about my own experience yet. So I started talking to other patients who had been diagnosed. But it was the first time in what at that point had been almost 12 years of dealing with this that I had ever spoken to those people. And hearing them articulate their experience and hearing them tell their stories as you speak about it so beautifully was inspiring to me. And not only made me realize that this can be okay and this can be something that you talk about, but also that so many of us are going through the same thing and no one knows about it.
I applaud you for using your skills and talents to try to improve the life of your community. Lily, you had mentioned that a lot of what you were trained to do is relevant to what you do now.
Right now, I am currently working for a nonprofit. When I was in the National Youth Leadership Institute, we did a lot of training. The experiences that I got volunteering and attending all these sessions and seeing how Debbie and the different people on our board run this has really helped for me to understand the needs of our, like my clients, and being able to speak for them as well and gear programs towards them as well.
And it's important to understand how those structures work too, because individuals have ups and downs, communities have ups and downs. So making sure that you understand structurally how something works enables it to be something that's sustainable, that's fixable, so that in a time of crisis, we're not scrambling to figure out what we need to do, who we need to pull in. There's something built already that we can utilize. Currently, what's something, and we'll start with you, Allie, what is something currently that you are challenged by or is presenting an obstacle to you in some way that you're grappling with?
I'm 24 years old and I live in New York City, and so sort of coming to terms with and figuring out how to be the sort of young 24-year-old New York City girl who I want to be, but also maintain health and maintain sort of presence of mind and all the things that I know that I need to do in order to stay healthy.
I think my biggest concern is that the joint damage that I've already done and how that's going to affect me in the coming years, because I guess it's not going to get better.
Right.
I've been trying to work out and get my joints stronger, and hopefully nothing too bad in the future, but I'm sure I'll have to go through something.
My biggest challenge now has been once the ACA rolled out, insurance has changed. It's been a bit of a challenge to get the same type of medication and the same type of care. Right now, I think all my meds are back in order, but I do feel like coming up on open enrollment, I do need to start understanding this a bit better and seeing what my options really are and seeing what's best for me.
Thank you again to Lilliam, Allie, and Bobby for participating in Powering Through. And thanks as well to the board and leadership at the Florida Hemophilia Association for hosting our panel. I'll be right back with smart people saying smart things after this final word from our sponsor.
NCHS believes in being a proactive partner in their patients' care, which means providing services like arranging convenient and discreet delivery, encouraging adherence to therapies, and monitoring your therapy outcomes. They also provide reimbursement services to help with navigating insurance requirements, which can be overwhelming for families affected by bleeding disorders or chronic disease. With a pharmacist available 24/7, NCHS can offer comfort to patients that someone will always be there when needed. Check out their website to learn more, nchswecare.com, or call 877-626-6247. Again, that's 877-626-6247.
Today's smart person is Malala Yousafzai. Malala was shot in the head when she defied the Taliban in Pakistan and demanded that girls be allowed to receive an education. Thankfully, she survived and went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize at just 17 years old. Here's one of many smart things Malala has said. Let us make our future now, and let us make our dreams tomorrow's reality. And that will do it for this episode of the Powering Through podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next month with another episode featuring another great conversation. Remember to subscribe to the Powering Through podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. You can also stream our podcast episodes, watch videos of our conversations, and learn about upcoming Powering Through events by visiting poweringthrough.org. Many thanks to NCHS for sponsoring the Powering Through podcast. Learn more about NCHS and their services by visiting nchswecare.com, where you'll also find links to their Facebook and Twitter accounts. And you can learn more about all of BloodStream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community by visiting BloodStreamMedia.com. This episode of the Powering Through podcast was written by Heather Robb and Patrick James Lynch, produced and distributed by Patrick James Lynch, Joshua Sterling Bragg, Rob Bradford, Colby Crow, and Avra Friedman. Artwork created by Ryan Geelan and Katie Wright Mead, and the Powering Through podcast is edited by Allison Stoney. My name is Heather Robb, and until next time, take self-care of yourself.
To watch video from any of our previous Powering Through sessions, visit poweringthrough.org, or to learn more about National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, NCHS, visit nchswecare.com.